Interested in a bookcase. They wanted Minnesota MUFON members to be the first ones offered bookcases. If not, I've got another nonprofit I can offer to. I've got neighbors, and worst case scenario, I can always donate them. But they wanted Minnesota MUFON members to be the first to have these things available. So if you could use a bookcase or 2 or 7, I think I've got about 7 of them, so let me know and we can arrange that. And I've also got 2 sets of cross-country skis and poles. One's bigger than the other, so they're 2 different sizes cross-country skis. Both got poles, so if you know a cross-country skier or if you're a cross-country skier yourself, I've got a couple skis and poles that I can give to you. Someone looked at them the other day and said, oh, they're the binding type. I don't want those, and I have no idea what that means. If you're a cross-country skier, maybe you know. If you don't want the binding type, I guess they're the binding type, but if you're interested in some cross-country skis, let me know, because I've got a couple sets for you. And, of course, you know that we are recording today, so our CTV crew is in the back. They're always doing recording for us. Let's give our CTV crew a big round of applause for all the work they do for us. And, of course, I noticed, too, we've also got Bob Schultz is here today. And Bob's in the blue shirt working on the camera right now. There's Bob. Bob's waving. Bob has been with CTV for a long time. He's probably won every award CTV can give, and he's produced easily over 100 hours of UFO footage for public access television through CTV. So Bob's a big player at CTV, and, of course, Tom Woods is back there, too. You always see Tom here. And the reason I'm bringing up Tom is because we do the videos. We also have a Minnesota MUFON YouTube channel. So if you could go out to YouTube, this would be a favor for us. Go out to YouTube, put in Minnesota MUFON, and when you come to our page, please subscribe to our page. Today when I checked our page, we had 898 subscribers. Our goal is to get to 1,000. The reason why our goal is to get to 1,000 is because YouTube, you can go out there and watch videos, and when you're watching videos, occasionally they'll have ads and things pop up. Well, those people that pop up those ads, they're paying for you to see those ads. And who are they paying? They're paying YouTube. So every time someone's watching a video and an ad pops up, YouTube gets paid. Well, if you go to our channel and you watch a video and an ad pops up, YouTube is going to continue to get paid until we get 1,000 subscribers. Once we get 1,000 subscribers, then we get a cut of that money. So we really want people to subscribe. We want to get up to 1,000 so we can start bringing them some of that money. I mentioned last time that a number of times at the board of directors meetings, the topic has come up. We charge $3 and $5 at the door. Do we want to raise that? We don't want to raise that. One of the reasons we don't want to raise that is because goal is to educate the public. We want to make it easy, so lower prices makes it easy. If we can start getting some of that YouTube money coming in and start putting that into our bank account, that helps us keep those prices low. So tell your friends, tell your neighbors. They don't even have to watch it. Just tell them to go subscribe. As long as they subscribe, we got that count. When those ads come up, we start getting paid for that. So we would appreciate that very much. So, anyone here for the first time? Got any first-time visitors here? Other than our speakers, a first-time visitor? Another first-time, a couple. So I'm seeing like 3 over here, first-time visitors. Cool. I want to welcome you and thank you for coming out. If you don't mind, would you mind standing, telling us your name and how you heard about us? I think I saw 3 people over here. If you feel comfortable, you don't have to.
I'm Sonia Walkendorf, and I learned about this through our friend Jenny Mitchell and my husband Leslie.
Nice. Thank you for coming out. And I saw a couple other hands here, right back here. Very cool. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for joining us. Was there another person over here that was a first-time visitor? Sure. Mm. Yeah. You have had your own alien encounters. Well, you're among friends here in that. So, and go ahead. Were you? Oh yeah, it happened quite unexpectedly a few months back. So yeah. If you're Here's a shameless plug. If you're interested, Craig's memorial service is out on our Minnesota MUFON YouTube channel. So if you want to see the memorial service that we had for him, you can go see that out on MUFON. And if we have 1,000 subscribers, we'll get paid when you do that. So that's a shameless plug. Get that in again. But I understand what so Craig came and spoke, and it was not what you expected. Well, you know, when most people meet Craig, it's more than they expected. So yes, we can understand that. So. Yeah, I can imagine it was really good, really good. So thank you both for coming out. So we're actually getting closer to presentation time than I thought. So just real quick before I jump into the presentation, because video guys, are we about ready to go? Stretch it? I can stretch it a little bit. Okay, cool, because I'm not quite ready yet. So is that so your first-time visitor? Any other first-time visitors here? No other first-time visitors. Okay, now the question that I really want to know. Is anyone a new member, a new MUFON member? Anyone new MUFON member here? New member, new member, new member? I'm always looking for new members. No new members. Well, if you're not a member and you'd like to be a member, you can go out to www.mufon.com and you can join and become a member. Next month when I ask, you can stand and tell us your name and tell us that you're a member. Oh, yep. So Kathy's got it all back there. She's got 3 things back there. She's got my email address, so if you need to get a hold of me for anything, you can see my email address is there. And then below that is the Minnesota MUFON website, www.mnmufon.org, followed by the global association, www.mufon.com. And actually, mnmufon.org is managed by Joel Henry right down here in our front row. Does a great job with their website. Let's give Joel a round of applause for his website work. And Mike Harris, are we going to Sarna's tonight? Is that the plan? Do you need a count on people who are going to Sarna's? Okay. So after our meeting here, we generally go to Sarna's to eat and chat and socialize a little bit more. If you'd like to go to Sarna's, we'd love to have you join us. Sarna's is on the corner of 40th and University. So the address is 3939 University Avenue Northeast. So you take 694 west to University, head south, and it's right on an intersection there. So we'd love to have you join us for dinner at Sarna's afterwards. And so we want to stretch. And I'm wondering, should we just do the Starworks drawing right now, or do the Starworks drawing right now? Okay. So I'm going to ask Jessica, if someone would please bring the fishbowl up here. We're going to have our guest speaker, Jessica, draw for our winners for the Starworks USA Scholarship. Bring them on up here. We're drawing 3 names. We're drawing a grand prize winner and 2 runners-up. So if you would mind drawing the name.
Anna Moss.
Anna Moss. Is Anna here? Wow, cool, cool. So let's make sure we hold on to that name. We want to make sure that she gets credit for that. And our first runner-up, if Anna can't make it. Karen Belmont. Is Karen here? Karen's here? Karen is not here? Okay, and our next runner-up is?
Joe Swenson.
Joe Swenson. Joe Swenson. Very cool. All right, all right. If you could run this back for me, please. Thank you. So congratulations to all of you. So Anna Moss is the grand prize winner. We'll make sure that gets tracked so that you get that, and we'll send your name down to Paula in Laughlin. And of course, if you can't make it, let us know. We've got 2 other runners up who'd be happy to take that spot if you are not able to make it. Today's drawing for Starworks USA has been audited by the law offices of Pleiadians, Friedman, and Walton. Just so for the official records, make sure that's covered. Pleiadians, Friedman, and Walton. There's 3 references. You get Mike Harris got it. He's laughing. His face is turning red back there. I heard someone over here got it too. So Pleiadians, Friedman, and Walton. Okay, so that's who's audited there. So how are we looking on time, guys? We need a little stretch. Are we good to go? I'm on. Okay, cool. Cool. Good afternoon, Minnesota MUFON members, honored guests, viewers watching us from around the world. My name is Tom Maher, and I'm the State Director of Minnesota MUFON. On behalf of Jessica Freeburg, the Minnesota MUFON Board of Directors, our Assistant State Director Mike Harris, our Chief Investigator Bill McNeff, and our field investigators, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you to our presentation today. Coming to you live from New Brighton, Minnesota, on Saturday, July 14th, 2018. Our presenter today is Jessica Freeburg, and she will be speaking on Monsters of the Midwest and Beyond. Jessica was born and raised on a farm in Iowa, and she holds degrees in family science and elementary education from the University of Nebraska and Buena Vista University. She went on to teach family and consumer science. She eventually left her teaching career to devote her time to being a stay-at-home mom to her 3 children. Her initial success as a writer was creating stories for children, but decided to try writing what she loved to read: the creepy stories that involved death, ghosts, and the unexplained. Her childhood farm life included encounters with ghosts, which caused a lot of fear and confusion. As her children began having similar encounters, she found herself determined not only to make sense of what was happening, but to remove the fear associated with such experiences. In 2013, Jessica founded Ghost Stories, Inc., a group of creative professionals who perform paranormal investigations for creative inspiration. She served as a paranormal news correspondent for Darkness Radio and produced the documentary film Haunted State: Whispers from History Past, which was turned into a series available for streaming on Amazon. While she started as a paranormal researcher focused on ghost and spirit encounters, she finds all fields of the unexplained equally important, including the connection between monster sightings and UFOs. So this month, Minnesota MUFON, we may go a little bit off the beaten path to which you are accustomed, but fear not. You are in good hands. We promise to return you to the familiar, none the worse for wear. So sit back and relax and get ready to learn a little bit more about the monsters of the Midwest and beyond. Please help me welcome Jessica Freeburg.
That? Oh, there we go. Okay, that was an excellent introduction. Thank you so much. And I'm glad my face is no longer on that screen. Super embarrassing. So I'm going to talk to you guys about mostly monsters, but I'm also going to bring in the connection that I found in my research that seems to be linking monsters with alien sightings and UFO sightings. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about ghosts, and that's just going to be at the beginning because that's kind of how I got started in this business. So before I can get into the paranormal piece, I am going to talk a little bit about myself. And this first slide I put up here because these are my books that I've written so far. I write both fiction and nonfiction. The Monsters of the Midwest book is a nonfiction work, but we wrote it as narrative nonfiction so we could make it a little more interesting and have dialogue in there. So some of that dialogue is created, but it's based and rooted in actual sightings. And we were very particular about finding stories that had primary source material, which means it was reported in newspapers or on TV stations in the news and that sort of thing. So I always like to show this because I'm kind of proud of it. I never in a million years thought I would publish 6 books in 2 years, but I did. And it kind of tells you a lot about who I am and what my personality is a little bit like. So my first book up there is got a creepy girl on the cover. She's dead. Spoiler alert, she's a ghost. Below that, we have a book about the Holocaust. Next to that is a book about an earthquake in Haiti that killed thousands of people. And, of course, there's the Monsters book. And the Night Visions is an anthology of creepy stories that were inspired by the paranormal investigations my group does. My probably lightest-hearted book is the Piper book. It's my most warm, fuzzy one, and it's about a community infested by rats and a guy that kidnaps children. So clearly I have some issues. I look like a really happy lady, and I totally am, but I love to write about creepy stuff. I've always been drawn to creepy things, and so that tends to be where I put my energy in writing. It usually surprises people that my roots as a writer is actually in writing for little children. And I started writing, publishing poems and short stories for children in magazines, and I really thought I would be a picture book writer. That was kind of my plan. I had 2 kids when I first started writing, and I thought, I can write a picture book You know, when I've got a toddler I'm chasing and I'm changing diapers, those are short. I can totally do that. But I started to attend conferences, and I would take my picture book manuscripts with me, and they were always like 5,000 words. But picture books are supposed to be 500 words. And I just couldn't figure out how to tell a good story without having a lot of words. And editors and agents would always say the same thing, basically. You have a really great voice, and you should totally keep writing, but you should not write picture books. This isn't your thing. Maybe you should write a novel, which actually gave me like heart palpitations at the thought. How do you write a novel when you've got little people running around? And at that time, I had 3 kids, so it was even more complicated. But I decided, you know what? I like a challenge, so I'm going to try it. I had started several novels by that time, but I always gave up on chapter 3. There's something about chapter 3, I'd get there and be like, done. Can't go any further. But I decided I was going to go all the way through. When I started writing my first novel that I was determined to finish, I decided it had to be a book that I would want to read. I didn't want to write to the trends. I didn't want to write anything that I thought would be a bestseller just because that's what people were buying at the time. I wanted to write a book that I would want to pick up and read, and I was going to write it for teenagers. So I thought back to the books I loved as a teen, and they were all, Stephen King and books about people being murdered and books about ghosts. And so I decided I was going to put my energy in that area to write. The reason I was always drawn to those things, though, is because I had a personal history with those particular experiences, as a lot of us do who are really into this sort of thing. As I was speaking to you guys today before we started, I heard a lot of people that had personal encounters with either monsters or ghosts or aliens and UFOs or all of the above. And I think that's what drew me to those stories, was that I could kind of find myself in those stories a little bit. As a child, I was always seeing things that kind of weren't there. Ghosts, whatever you want to call them, or hearing voices that weren't supposed to be there, and having these encounters that no one else was having. I was always the girl at the party who had really good ghost stories, except they were actually true experiences. And so I put these images of kind of iconic movies from my childhood because those were the movies that, although they terrified me on every level, the Poltergeist and The Shining, I also could connect with those movies and see a little piece of myself in there. And there's like this kind of comfort in knowing, hey, maybe I'm not the only one having these weird experiences because they made a whole movie about it, so other people must be too. All of these experiences that I had as a kid led to a very natural curiosity. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about one of the experiences that I had that was really profound to me. My dad's house and my stepmom's house seemed to be super haunted. Whenever I was there, I would hear people walking around in the room below my bedroom or people talking in the attic above my bedroom. And one day I was sitting downstairs watching TV, which was kind of a big deal. When I was a kid on the farm, we actually had marbles, and you only had 7 marbles a week. And when you turned in a marble, that was one of your television shows for the week. So if I was going to give a marble up for one of my shows, I was going to watch it from start to finish, and nothing was going to interrupt that time for me. Just my stepmom and I were home at the time, and I was sitting down watching a show in the den. And in the den, the TV stand is right by a hallway that leads to the bathroom. And there's also a door over to the right that they would pass through the den, but not have to cross in front of me to go to the bathroom. But I remember a woman came into the room and walked through, and I saw her go to the hallway and into the bathroom. I saw the door open out of the corner of my eye and heard it shut, and then she never come out. I assumed it was my stepmom. Obviously, that makes the most rational sense. And I finished watching my show, and I realized, well, she's been in there a really long time. Maybe I should go check on her. So I went over to the bathroom, and I knocked on the door, and nobody answered. And then I opened the door, and I looked inside, and there was nobody there, but the light was on. And I went upstairs to where my stepmom was working on her art, and I said, well, what are you, like a ninja? How did you get back up here without me seeing you? And she said, I've never left the room. I don't know what you're talking about. Years later, my husband and I bought a house where someone committed suicide. We didn't know it, and yeah, of course we bought that house. But weird things were happening, and I was a little bit freaked out by the things that were going on, and I said, I just don't want to live in a house with that sort of a history. I wasn't really sure at that time how to clear that sort of energy out, so it really frightened me. And my stepmom said, oh, Jess, people die in houses all the time. It's no big deal. Someone died in that bathroom at our old house. And I said, oh, I knew it. I knew it. I saw that person walk in there. So, as a kid, after a particularly frightening experience, I sat down with my dad and I said, why does this keep happening? Why do I keep seeing these things? It's making me feel crazy. And my dad's logical explanation was, it's demons, which is so comforting when you're like 10 years old. And in my dad's defense, my dad is the nicest guy in the world. But in his paradigm, in his religious beliefs, that was the only option. It was either they were angels or they were demons. You could either get lucky and have a nice stroll with an angel through a cornfield, which happened to a guy at our church, and we all loved that story that Junior used to tell us. Or you could be the kid who gets grabbed by unseen hands when you go to turn the light on in your friend's closet, which was my experience. And there's nothing angelic about that. So, by obvious deduction, it has to be demons. I never bought into that because it didn't feel scary, even though it was, surprising and startling. Even getting grabbed by something, it didn't feel scary. It just felt like something wanted to get my attention. So I really couldn't get on board with the demons and angels theory. And as I grew up, my children started to have their own experiences seeing things, which is when I decided that's the type of book I'm going to write. I'm going to write a story that kind of puts the somewhere in between. There's angels and there's demons, sure, but there's also just spirits that are passing through. And so that's the story that I ended up writing. When I finished that story, I signed with my literary agent, and she suggested I read a book about connecting with potential readers before she even sold the book to a publisher. And it just seemed like really logical that I should start ghost hunting and blogging about those experiences. But the only problem was I didn't know anyone who did that sort of thing. I had no friends in the paranormal community at all. I didn't know anything about that. So I was like, I'll just take my family. So I look back at this picture, and I have it in one of Brielle's baby books, and it says Brielle's first ghost hunt, and she's the little one. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't seem like very great parenting. Like maybe I shouldn't be taking babies to haunted places. And when I say ghost hunt, I use that term very loosely. We had that app where it like kind of gives you a blip on a radar. It's called Ghost Radar. And I had the kids walk around and say, tell mommy if you see anything on your ghost radar. Was pretty much how that ghost hunting went. So I got together with a group of my friends, and we went to the Palmer House Hotel in Sauk Center, Minnesota, which if you ever get a chance to go somewhere and you're interested in haunted places, I would highly recommend visiting there. It's wonderful. And we had so much fun. We just said we have to do this all the time. And I thought, if we do it all the time and we form it as a group of creative professionals, we can all write it off on our taxes. So that's what we did. We formed Ghost Stories Inc. in 2013, and we've traveled from New York to LA and lots of places in between, all under the guise of we're trying to get creatively inspired. And we're so interested in having these experiences, but also trying to understand what's causing them? Why is this happening? And what does this mean for all of us on a bigger level? What are these things that are trying to interact with us? Now, following that strange idea I had in my mind to form Ghost Stories Inc., which I have to tell you, I fought it really hard. I tried to ignore that idea. Night after night, it kept coming in my head, you should form a ghost hunting group. And I was like, no, that's too weird. I'm on the PTO. No one will ever understand. But as soon as I did that and I embraced that piece of who I am, all of these doors just naturally started opening up, and opportunities presented themselves in ways that I really never, ever imagined. I was asked to be an editor for Fate magazine. I had never done professional editing. I had done freelance before that. And but when I was asked by the editor-in-chief, I was like, sure, I'll do that. And I met Dave Schrader and Tim Dennis at a paranormal convention, and they invited me on, and they said, would you like to be a paranormal news correspondent? And I said, oh, sure, I'll do that too. Then I was invited to submit stories for anthologies, and I was asked to produce a documentary. And at the time, I said, I don't even know what a producer does. But yes, sign me up. I'm going to do that. So all of these great opportunities presented themselves because I think when you're on the right path and you're kind of where the big guy upstairs, or however you like to look at the creator or whatever, you know, if you're following that path you're supposed to be on, all of this stuff is going to open up naturally, and that's kind of how it happened. The more I was introduced to people telling their stories, the more I became very impassioned about the reality that people are having these experiences, but people don't like to talk about them. They don't like to sit down in mixed company. Here, we get to talk about them freely, which is so awesome, which is why I love things like this. But if you're sitting down with the other moms from your kids' school, you're probably not going to be talking about ghost encounters or, you know, that time you saw a UFO or anything like that. And I just wanted to do what I could to kind of take that stigma away. I feel like the more we talk about it and the more we put these stories out in the public, the less of a stigma there is attached to it. And I also really want to reduce the fear, because I remember being a kid and being terrified when I would have these encounters, and I didn't want my children to feel that way, and I know there are other people who have these experiences and find them terrifying, and I want to reduce the fear. And I'm a storyteller. I want to entertain. So those are my 3 primary goals. Now, when we got the book, Monsters of the Midwest, that was a journey that started with an idea. And the idea wasn't my own. It was actually my publisher's idea. And when he presented it to me, I, of course, said yes, because I said yes to everything at that time. But I knew that I wanted these to be stories that could be kind of campfire tales. So stories that were true, but stories that you could find very entertaining and that could be readable at a young person's level, because this would have been exactly the kind of book I wanted to pick up as a kid. So we started, my co-writer Natalie and I started just by going through and Googling monster sightings in the Midwest. We had our map that the publisher gave us and said we need stories from this state and that state, and these are the type of stories we're looking for. So we set out to find those. And then we kind of eliminated the ones that were a little weird, like in the sense that people were probably smoking marijuana or something, and so they were maybe not entirely credible. And we looked for ones that were actually reported in the newspapers. Those were the type of stories that we wanted to have because they had that primary source support. And there were so many of those. I was actually incredibly surprised. And particularly back in the 1800s, they reported a lot of these experiences. And when I get to some of these, the Van Meter one, which I have a little clipping from the newspaper, that was huge. The Van Meter visitor, I think is what Chad Lewis called it, because he didn't want to call it a monster. You know, these were reputable people reporting these things, and it was terrifying. But there were so many great stories and great reports that we could delve into for that book. I did put on here a really great source is newspapers.com. There is a fee to that, but if you're ever doing any sort of research and you want to get into those old newspaper clippings, that I would highly recommend using that. So Mike Harris is actually the one who started talking to me about coming here to speak. And when we were talking about it, I said, I know exactly what I want to dive into in this presentation, because as we were doing our research, there were so many of these monsters that had such an alienish feel to them that I kind of thought as I read them, I don't know that they're monsters at all. They feel so otherworldly. So there were 3 questions that I was kind of looking at as I was going into my research for this. The first one is, do some cryptids have relationships with aliens? Are monsters and aliens one and the same thing? And are monsters and aliens different, but perhaps come from different dimensions than our own? Now, I'm going to rely heavily on my notes when I read you the actual stories, because I don't want to miss anything. The first story that I thought of when I thought about doing this presentation was the Enfield monster from Enfield, Illinois. And This occurred in the spring of 1973. What I have up here is an artist's rendering of what the creature was said to look like. It was said to have a short body and stand about 3 to 4 feet tall. The witnesses said it had 3 legs, gray skin, 2 short arms, and 2 pink eyes the size of flashlights. Now, I want you to look at this guy. Some people might say he's so ugly, he's cute. But most of us will probably just say he's rather terrifying. I want you to imagine being a child and encountering this creature while you're outside playing by yourself. That's exactly what happened to the first witness on April 25th, 1973. Greg Garrett was playing outside, probably lost somewhere in his imagination, as little boys are when they're playing by themselves. And it was getting rather late. His parents were, expecting him to come in at any moment. It was around 9:00 p.m. So when he came bursting through the doors, they probably just assumed he was done playing. But when they looked at him, they were startled by his appearance. He was crying, he was visibly shaken, and his shoes were completely shredded on his feet. He told his parents that he was playing outside and he came across this monster, which he described to them as having gray skin and giant pink eyes. And he said that it had stomped on his feet and had attacked him. I don't know how I would respond to that as a parent, but I'm sure they ran outside and tried to see if they could see anything, and there was nothing there. The creature wasn't there because he had already moved on. He went on down the road to their neighbor's house, and he gave a visit to the McDaniels children. They were home alone. Their parents were at a PTO meeting, and the kids were kind of just getting ready for bed. Their parents should be home any moment, and they heard a noise at the back of the house in one of the bedrooms. They heard a scraping noise, so they went to investigate. They assumed it was maybe a squirrel or a cat had gotten on top of the air conditioner that was mounted outside underneath the bedroom window. So they went a little closer to look, and what they saw was these 2 red eyes staring back at them. And this gray-skinned creature looking in through the window, clawing at the screen. And they were in complete panic, as any child would be. Their parents came home shortly after that, and they found the children very, very upset, and the children had them come in, and they slammed that door shut and said, "Don't go out there, there's a monster out there." And of course, as an adult, we're going to rationalize this, right? "Oh, you guys, you shouldn't have watched that scary movie," or whatever you must have done while we were gone. And so when they heard the scratching at the front door, they were not expecting to open it and find what the kids had told them they had seen, but that's exactly what happened. Mr. McDaniels opened the front door, and standing on his porch was this little cute guy, reaching toward him with his clawed hands. He slammed that door, ran to his bedroom, got his pistol, went back to the door, opened it up, and opened fire on the creature. And he hit it, but he said the creature was really unaffected by it. He just kind of let out this unearthly screeching sound and then bounded in 3 leaps 50 feet away from the house. So you can imagine, I could never bound 50 feet in 3 leaps. So it obviously has a pretty great ability to go a long distance with a little bit of effort. He called the police. The police came immediately. They found scratches on the side of the house. They found scratches on the front door. And they found footprints where he said the creature was. And the footprints showed that there was a creature that had 3 feet, 1 in the back smaller than the 2 in the front, and it had 6 toe pads on each foot. And so they had this evidence of something having had occurred, and of course it got reported in the newspapers, which is why we picked it as one of our stories. And 5 days later, a few days later, there were 5 men that were going out to find this monster. They were amateur monster hunters, and they found the same sort of creature. Of course, they opened fire on it, and again, the creature was not affected by their bullets. And you'll find as I talk about these monsters, this is a common thread. They are not affected by our bullets, which really makes them even more terrifying because there's really not much we can do about them. A few days later, a local news director for the local radio station went out with a crew, and they wanted to get evidence of the creature for their show. And they, in fact, did get evidence of this creature. They were able to tape record the sound of it screaming. They saw it kind of standing beside an abandoned house, which was nearby the home of the Garrett and McDaniels family. And when they saw it, they turned on the recorder and they captured the scream. There were then investigators that came, and I'm going to look at my notes so I don't mess up anybody's name. Lauren Coleman, a cryptozoologist, came to investigate the claims, and he noted hearing the exact same sounds. Now, Lauren was a writer for Fate magazine, and so he and another gentleman with that magazine, Jerome Clark, wrote an article which they called Swamp Slobs of Illinois, which if you look at this picture, he kind of does look a bit like a slob, a terrifying slob. Now we're going to go to Evansville, Indiana, where there was an account of a creature called the green-clawed beast. On a hot August afternoon in 1955, Naomi Johnson and her friend Louise Lamble went out for a swim to cool off in the Ohio River near Evansville, Indiana. While Louise floated near the shoreline in an inner tube, Naomi swam further out. Suddenly, Naomi started screaming, and she was pulled underwater. She managed to pull herself free, and she started to try to get away, but she was really only had time to get a single gulp of air before she was grabbed again and pulled back down. When the women finally made it to shore, Naomi said that claw-like hands had grabbed her by the ankles and her calves and had tried to keep her under the water. They saw that she had gashes running down the length of her legs from the claws, and that she had a handprint imprinted on her leg. It was said to have a greenish glow, and she was never able to wash it off. They tried to clear it off. It wouldn't go away. She had it on there for many days later. Now, when she went home, and she was treated for her injuries, she went home, and a few days later, she was visited at her home by a man dressed in a suit who showed her a badge and identified himself as being with the United States Air Force. He asked her questions about what had occurred, and then he requested that she not speak to the media any more than she already had. It had already been reported in the papers, and he was asking her to stop talking about it. And we're going to come back to that because the Air Force is involved in another case I'm going to speak about next. Some researchers have suggested the strange beast could be related to another mysterious aquatic creature that's been spotted in Loveland, Ohio, called the Loveland frogmen, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But I want to talk about an alien encounter which occurred on the exact same day as the encounter with the green-clawed beast, about 80 miles away. Now, this encounter wasn't with a monster, but it was with aliens. And it was exactly the same day. It was in the same evening, 80 miles, I believe it was north and west of where this occurred to the women in the Ohio River. And Billy Ray Taylor was staying with some friends, and they were just in a small kind of shanty house out in the country. And he went out to get some water, and he saw a silver object go through the air and basically land in a ravine not far from the house. And he ran back inside, very excited and a little freaked out. And he was telling everyone what happened, but nobody would believe him. I actually found a really great video clip of this. There is a movie that they did a documentary about some of these monster/alien encounters. And so I do want to show you a little clip of it because they actually have interviews with some of the children who are witnesses. And now they're, older. This was quite a long time ago in 1955, but I think it's pretty cool one, so I'm going to have you watch it. But what they described was a 3 to 4 foot tall being that had a human shape, silver skin that had a greenish glow, large almond-shaped eyes, a long, thin mouth, thin, short legs, large ears, and arms that were double the length of human arms, ending in hands with claws at the end of them. And they reported that it appeared to be taking steps, but above the ground. So when I listened to this, it's almost like it was trying to mimic being a person. Like some of these, I think, are they trying to look like us, but they can't quite get it right? You know, do these guys go back after coming here and say, the arms were way too long. Their arms are half this long. And then they try again. And then you get the Einfield monster, whose little arms were about this long. They said his arms were super short, almost like a T-Rex. So, I mean, it's just so strange that they're so human-like, but then they have such distorted features. And that he was mimicking walking, yet he wasn't really walking at all. Why would he have to mimic walking if he just floats above the ground anyway? I don't know. But once again, this beast was unaffected by bullets, and this family opened fire on this creature, and there were 12 of them that they reported coming into their home. So I'm going to go ahead and show that little bit of a clip. The acting in the reenactments borders on cheesy, but the interviews are absolutely golden. So.
It was August of 1955 that the news broke of a very unusual event, the likes of which had never been experienced before in the life of Hopkinsville in Christian County, Kentucky.
My father, he worked at a carnival, and they was all there just to getting together because he hadn't seen home for a while, and they was all just sitting around talking when all this come about. And I believe it's Billy Ray went to get a drink of water, and that's when he seen the shiny object in the field.
And it scared him so that when he went inside to tell his family, and in disbelief, they put him down as a joke and told him to, they sort of said, don't be doing this again, you're doing this all the time. Until later on that evening when everything really started happening with the beings supposedly attacking the house.
What are you trying to tell us, son?
Well, what I'm trying to tell you, I was just out at the well pumping some water when something came down out of the sky, a bright light or something, I don't know what. It flew lickety-split across the field out there, and it looked like it landed somewhere down in the gully.
Okay, here he goes again. Billy Ray, you are not only a very bad card player, you are a really bad liar to boot.
Well, why would I lie about something like that?
And they kind of just shook it off until they started seeing the beings approach the house. Then they took it serious.
What in the blazes is going on with those darn dogs, Lucky? I told you to get rid of them varmints. I can't hear myself think, let alone read a good
Shut
book.
your trap, Vera. You be still.
From what people tell us, they saw the lights landing back over in here. Back when I was a little kid, there was two big, almost perfectly circled indents of the ground. And we used to take kids back here when I was a kid and tell them that's where they landed.
I remember we all were sitting there about, I'd say around 8 o'clock, maybe, we heard a noise on top of the roof.
Listen, Mom, listen. There's something on the roof.
It is told that these beings were on the roof, scratching and clawing, trying to get through the ceiling, and the children and the females, mothers and such, that were in the house at the time were trying to hide, trying to get away from this. They were all scared.
Make it go away, make it go away. strong, little one. Be strong. It's okay. It's okay. Shh.
The house stood actually in front of the well. It was just basically a shotgun house. 2 big rooms on each end, a little old like hall where the front door was. Had the back door coming out this way.
Well, he said they would come up to the windows and they just kind of stick to the side of the house like a spider could. And he said they just kind of peek around the windowsill with their heads and use them old big beady eyes, and they just look in the window and just stare.
There was a gun battle involved where they were trying to shoot at him. They said they were attacking the house, attacking the people.
Yeah, I was kind of real scared. I was in the corner of the house on the floor, and everybody was running around there just panicked.
And Aunt Glennie was a very Christian-like lady, and she was a Pentecostal, a holiness lady, and she was a very, very truthful person. But this scared her to death, and she had to move out of the summer.
He stuck his head out the door. One of them green men reached down and got him by the hair of the head and picked him up. Well, he said, we got to do something. And that's all he said, and they got up and grabbed the shotguns and started shooting.
They shot at them, but it didn't hurt them. They just kind of rolled up in a little ball and kind of rolled back down the hill over there where the ship was. I mean, you could see this big bright light, they said.
And I know this for a fact. They had shot out one of the windows and shot through the wall of the house. And there is photography that shows today that this happened. As to whether it was actually a confrontation between another being or human, I can't say for sure, but I do know that there are facts proving that something of a higher power had landed.
So for hours, the creatures surrounded the house, peering at the people while the men tried to hold them off with gunshots until the family and friends fled to nearby Hopkinsville. Over 20 police officers returned to the farm to investigate, and they found evidence of the struggle by way of the bullet holes in the walls and the screens and the windows and whatnot, but there was no evidence of the aliens being there. However, when the police finally left around 2:30 in the morning, the aliens returned and continued doing the same thing they had been doing before, climbing on the walls and peering in at them, climbing on the roof, and just terrorizing these people for hours and hours until finally at dawn, they left as quickly as they had come. The police report also states that they spoke to neighbors, and neighbors did report seeing strange lights in that area and then hearing gunshots after that. And the police report also indicates that the family was not intoxicated. No one in that family was intoxicated at the time of the report. And we have people of all ages that were experiencing this, from the adult men down to little children, who are the ones that we were able to see the interviews with, who had to endure that type of absolute terror. I can't even imagine. The Air Force was also called in to investigate, but found no tangible evidence beyond the eyewitness accounts. This fact that the Air Force was called in lends credibility to the report that the Air Force came and spoke to Naomi about her encounter with the creature in the water. They were both reported in the newspaper. They happened on exactly the same day. And I suppose if I believed in coincidences, I could say maybe that's a coincidence, but I don't. So I have to think somehow these two things are somehow related, being that they were so close in proximity and they happened within just a few hours of one another. Another creature that I'm going to talk about, which is also an aquatic monster, is the Loveland frogmen. And these reports began in May of 1955. Now, I don't know if that sounds familiar, but May 1955 was also when Naomi was attacked by the Ohio River monster. And that same night in May 1955, this family had the encounter with the aliens at their home. Loveland is not very far away from these locations. It's just a couple-mile drive, so it's not far at all. So I have to reason this kind of has to be related. So that first sighting, I'm going to go through and tell you a little bit about that. This monster was, again, said to be bipedal, but the difference between this one and the other ones, who were these bipedal creatures that all were reported to be around 3 to 4 feet tall, was that this one had the look of a frog. It had a very distinctive frog face, leathery skin, webbed hands and feet. That first encounter happened at 3:30 a.m., and the witness was an anonymous businessman who didn't care to share his name because it was probably very embarrassing, who saw 3 frogs on the side of the road. And he pulled off to the side of the road to kind of see, what was going on. He wasn't quite sure what it was. He probably thought at first it was some sort of an animal or something. But then the frogs stood up on their back legs and stood up like we stand. And one of them, he reported, had what looked like a wand, and he held it in the air and it started to shoot sparks out of it. It would be quite a long time before we had another report of a frogman sighting on May 3rd in 1972 at 1 a.m. And this time, the witness was a police officer, and he was out on a road in the same area when he encountered a frog that he saw on the side of the road. At this time, the roads were very slick with ice, so the officer was moving fairly slowly when he came upon what he thought was probably a dog on the side of the road. The creature ran in front of him, and he slammed on his brakes. And after the creature ran in front of him, it stood up on its 2 hind legs, and he saw that it was a 3 to 4 foot tall standing frog. And he was very startled by that, and the creature hurried and jumped over the guardrail and disappeared into the river. A separate officer arrived at the scene to investigate and reported finding scratch marks on the guardrail where the creature reportedly scrambled over, trying to get out of sight. 2 weeks later, another officer reported seeing what he thought was an injured or dead animal lying on the road as he was driving outside of Loveland in the same area. Concerned the animal being in the road could cause an accident because of the icy road conditions, he stopped his cruiser and got out. As he approached the creature, it rose into a crouched position, and the officer opened fire on it. The creature then jumped over the guardrail, just like the last one did, and disappeared down into the brush toward the river. In 2001, this officer changed his story, but the initial report remains. We have that report to look back on and see what he said happened in the moment. And then, 30, 40 years later, he decided it wasn't a frogman at all, and he decided it must have been a lizard, a very, 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 very large lizard that someone had been keeping as a pet, and so he tried to rationalize it. But that's what we do. When you have an experience like this, we kind of want to find a logical reason for it because that's more comfortable than admitting that we saw a 3 to 4 foot tall frog standing in the middle of the road, shooting sparks out of a wand. The last report of the frogman sightings occurred in August of 2016, so very recently. And this time the witnesses, a young man named Sam Jacobs and his girlfriend, had their cell phones with them. So they were actually able to snap a photo and get some video footage. This is the photo that they took, and it's very dark. It was the middle of the night. They were playing Pokemon Go, as teenagers like to do, when they came upon a very large-looking animal down by the side of the river. And so they got out to just kind of see what it was, and then it stood up on its 2 back legs, and here they're in this Loveland area where these frogmen are reported. So he pulled out his camera and took this photo, and I'm going to show you the video. Hopefully it's in here. I didn't look to see if it was. I want to warn you, if it does play, it's very, very dark. So we can see with this photo, it's very dark too, but you can kind of see the shape of the frog in this, and you can see the two very large, bright eyes, and you're gonna see mostly those eyes in the video. So it's not a lot, but he got a little bit. But when you can look at that photo and then look at the video and see, you know, what those bright lights went with, it's kind of pretty cool evidence. Of course, reporting something like this draws all kinds of speculations about your sanity, or if you're just trying to make something up to get attention. But Jacob told Fox 9 News, end quote, "I swear on my grandmother's grave that this is the truth. I'm not sure whether it was a frogman or just a giant frog. Either way, I've never seen anything like it." And isn't that sort of the thing? We all say, why aren't there more photos of Bigfoot? And why aren't there more videos of these things? But then as soon as we get a photo or as soon as we get video, people try to debunk it and say that it's not true. And unfortunately, sometimes it's not, because we do have to deal with hoaxes. But it's just funny that we can't win. If you get video, you're obviously crazy and you're faking it. Van Meter mystery is one of my favorites because there is so much reporting done on this particular incident, and it happened in a small town in Iowa, which is where I'm from as a child. And I can just imagine these, small town folks back in that day having these encounters. And small town folk in Iowa, we don't make stuff up like this. And, we probably don't even talk about it when it happens very much because it's not proper. But back then, this was reported across the United States in newspapers, and it still remains a major source of news today. It's been in the newspapers over the past 100+ years. The sightings began in late September of 1903 when a local implement dealer, U.G. Griffin, saw the creature flying across the rooftops. Griffin, of course, shot at the creature, but quickly realized the bullets had no effect. The next night, there were two separate encounters. The local doctor fired shots at the creature outside of his office, and the bank cashier, Peter Dunn, opened fire on the creature outside of the bank. Dunn also took a plaster cast of a 3-toed track that the creature left behind. The next night, O.V. White was woken up by the creature as he slept above his hardware store. He saw the creature perched on top of a telephone pole. Sleeping in a nearby store, Sidney Gregg was awakened by White shooting at the creature. They both described the creature as hopping like a kangaroo, and the local teacher, who also was a witness, described it as being something prehistoric. By this time, the entire community was living in a state of fear. There had been night after night after night of sightings of this creature, and they couldn't begin to comprehend what was making these appearances in their otherwise peaceful community. But they didn't doubt the reports, because every witness who was reporting these occurrences was a very well-respected member of their community, and not people who would be prone to making this stuff up, and not people who were out heavily drinking and then seeing things that weren't actually there. So when J.L. Platt Jr. heard an unholy sound emanating from the abandoned coal mine near the old brickyard, the local men gathered up their guns and headed out in a posse to put an end to this encounter and get down to what was happening. The posse waited out at the abandoned mine all night until two creatures finally returned. So they thought they only had one creature, but it turns out they had two. One of them was larger, and the other one was a smaller version of the same sort of thing. All of these men opened fire on these creatures, and they were completely unaffected physically. They let out really loud screeches and emitted an extremely foul odor, and then disappeared into the mine. And the residents of the community quickly grabbed their shovels and barricaded that mine, and the creatures were never seen again. Similarly in appearance is the demon leaper in Louisville, Kentucky. And And this legend goes all the way back to Native Americans, where they would report a similar type of creature. But this particular one in Louisville began about 140 years ago. It was so popular and so well known and talked about that it appeared in the New York Times in September 1880. And it's been reported years and years since, making another appearance as late as 2014 in the local NBC stations there. This creature is typically seen around the Walnut Street Baptist Church, which is a Gothic version, Gothic-style architecture, and it has gargoyles on the top. So a lot of people think that it's like one of those gargoyles coming to life. That's what they think it is at first when they see it. It looks like a gargoyle. It has bat-like wings, leathery skin, claws, and talons. There have been countless sightings of it, and it seems content to simply be seen. It's not a creature that actually interacts with anyone, and it's not a creature who has attacked anyone. So it seems to be a fairly innocuous creature. But it does like to show itself by sitting on balconies of surrounding homes and spreading out its immense 10-foot wingspan, just to show everyone off how big he is. With its gargoyle-like appearance, and leathery skin and clawed feet and talons. Like I said, there's never been a report of them being malicious. They just look freaky. So it's almost like the community has a really scary-looking guardian because he kind of just seems to be watching out over the community. A lot of people will call this the Mothman of Kentucky. And the same with the Van Meter visitor. They will call that the Mothman of Iowa because they all have such similar properties to them. But unlike the Mothman in Virginia, which I'm sure you've all heard about, that's kind of a notorious monster sighting, there have been no catastrophic events associated with the sightings of any of these other creatures. They've also compared these creatures to London's Spring Hill Jack. So we're going to go across the ocean and talk a little bit about him. While all of these creatures possess an ability to leap unnatural lengths through the air, Spring Hill Jack is unique in his aggressive tendencies. He is actually the only cryptid, I guess if we're going to call him that I would not want to encounter, and I would probably be terrified if I came upon, because he sounds really mean. He would actually attack people in the streets, and it kind of started off as he was just trying to startle them, is what people thought. But then he became more aggressive and started to actually physically attack people. And he's said to have a demon-like face and clawed talon fingers and wear a cape, again, able to leap extraordinary lengths in one leap, and that he could shoot a blue flame from his mouth, from his face. The attacks began in the early 1800s and continued in London through 1938. They were fast and furious, with the monster tearing at clothes and flesh, and he tended to primarily target women. One victim was even lured out of her home when a man knocked at the door, identified himself as a police officer, and declared he needed a candle to light the darkness as he was apprehending Spring Hill Jack. But when the woman came out, the man exposed his devil face and glowing red eyes before spewing flames at her. He then pinned the startled woman under his arm, tore at her face, neck, and clothing until someone inside heard her screaming and pulled her back into safety. It's said that even after she was pulled back in, he continued to knock at the door, trying to get into the house, until people heard the people inside screaming and came running, and then he ran away and leapt extraordinarily far into the sky and disappeared. While some speculate the attacker was a nobleman named Henry de la Poer Beresford, the strange sightings and attacks continued long after his death in 1859. We know of these attacks continuing into 1938, and then they started up again in the 70s. Reports of sightings and attacks range from the beast simply startling people in a prankish manner to him leaping 10 feet over fences, jumping across rooftops, scaling church steeples. Jack was even blamed for the 1845 murder of a 13-year-old prostitute named Maria Davis. The June 1961 issue of Flying Saucer Review presented an article speculating that Spring Hill Jack was actually an alien. They suggested that his frightening face was more alien in appearance than devil, and that his ability to defy gravity through his leaping was due to the fact that the gravity on Earth was different than that on his home planet. Additionally, they suggested the great aurora, known as the Fatima storm, that lit up Europe and beyond into southern Australia, Bermuda, and southern California was actually Jack's ship returning to take him home. Now, why would they suggest such a thing? Because the sightings of Jack in Europe completely stopped after that event. However, it seems that if his ship did pick him up, they simply carried him across the pond and dropped him off in America. Because in 1938, until as recently as 1995, there have been similar reports of something very much like Spring Hill Jack here in America. At one point, a resident of Providence Town in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, even shot Jack with a shotgun. According to the man's report to police, he was quoted as saying, "The darn thing just laughed and jumped my 8-foot fence in one leap." He was, again, completely unaffected by a bullet. While Jack terrorized the U.S. for a few decades, he seems to have returned to England in the 1970s with reports of a red-eyed predator grabbing women, punching men, walking down the sides of walls, jumping between rooftops, and even vanishing into thin air when he was finally cornered by police. Much like the reports in Van Meter, many of the eyewitnesses were reputable and well-respected members of their communities. Unlike the Van Meter creature and the demon leaper, Jack seems to have a more humanoid appearance. But again, we have a bipedal creature, unaffected by bullets, much like the Enfield monster, the Loveland frogs, and the Sutton family alien encounters. So we can see a lot of commonalities in all of these reports. And now we get to my favorite, Bigfoot. I mean, look at him, he's so cute. I like to think of the nice Bigfoot, but I know there are people who have had terrifying Bigfoot encounters. But while I'm intrigued by all of these monsters, I do have a soft spot for each of them, except maybe Jack, because he seems kind of evil. Bigfoot is certainly one of our most celebrated cryptids. Most monsters get a local celebration, but Bigfoot has celebrations all around the United States and the world. Everybody knows who Bigfoot is. You can go out monster hunting and try to find Bigfoot. You can pay for excursions where you try your hand at monster hunting with professionals, or you can watch Finding Bigfoot on TV if you want. I mean, he's kind of everywhere. Sightings of Bigfoot have occurred across the United States and beyond. He seems to be particularly active in the Pacific Northwest. He's described as being covered in black, brown, or reddish hair, bipedal ape-like, 6 to 9 foot tall, and typically tends to be found in remote wooded regions. Unfortunately, there have been numerous hoaxes involving Bigfoot over the years, so it makes it hard to know when someone has a true encounter. And when we do get photographs, it's often rationalized to be a black bear or maybe a black bear with mange. But if you Google Bigfoot, you'll get all kinds of awesome images. This one will top the list if you do a Google search for images of Bigfoot. And this one was shot by Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin in Northern California. And there's been a lot of speculation about whether this is authentic or not, and people have tried to recreate it by putting someone in a monster suit or gorilla suit. And they're never able to replicate it with this level of authenticity. If you Google search Bigfoot, you'll also find a lot of giant footprints that have been shot with cameras and captured. This particular photograph was outside a residential home in Johnstown, Pennsylvania in 1980. It was 17 3/4 inches long, and it was discovered in conjunction with reports of strange noises and a very foul smell, which is often accompanied by Bigfoot. Now, there are a lot of theories about what Bigfoot is because he is so prevalent and people are very interested in trying to understand. There's so many accounts of seeing this creature that it's hard to deny there's something there. Some people think that it's very likely a highly evolved species of ape that we've been unable to officially classify because it's so elusive. But that one's kind of hard to wrap my brain around. If it's this large and it's been around for hundreds of years, how has there not been a carcass or something found that we're able to say, here it is, this is Bigfoot? But that tends to be the most prevalent theory where Bigfoot is concerned. There are other people that think that he's not of flesh at all, that he's actually a woodland spirit and a protector of the woodlands. And that actually goes back to Native American philosophy, and that this Bigfoot is actually here to keep an eye on the earth and protect it, probably from us, because we tend to destroy things as people. But that kind of explains why there's no evidence, because we can't have evidence, flesh and bone evidence of something that isn't flesh and bone. And then we have the alien theory. Could Bigfoot be an alien species, perhaps dropped off on our planet for scientific experimentation by creatures from other planets? Are they maybe trying to see how our atmosphere and our environment affects Bigfoot and then taking him back up with them? This is what some people wonder. And one researcher, Stan Gordon, he entered into the field of researching Bigfoots, really believing in the philosophy that Bigfoot is an unidentified zoological creature. And he formed a group in 1970 that became very reputable in Pennsylvania. So when they would have sightings, the local police and the news reporters would send them over to Stan to investigate. In 1973, however, he kind of changed his thought about if Bigfoot was just an unidentified creature or if he was somehow linked to aliens. There were so many reports of Bigfoot in Pennsylvania at that time that were accompanied by UFO sightings at exactly the same time that he had to start to think somehow these are related. They were able to debunk quite a few of them, and they were able to find people who were basically making hoaxes out of it, but they were also finding many of these things were actually happening. In one of these cases, a UFO was observed hovering just above a field where two Bigfoot creatures were standing at the exact same time. The UFO departed, and the creatures went into the woods. The state trooper who investigated reported a large glowing area on the ground where the witnesses reported the UFO had landed briefly. Reports of strange lights and unidentified aerial phenomenon accompanied by Bigfoot sightings in the same area continued, and it continued across the state for many months. So Stan and his team really had their hands full during 1973 and in 1974, where they were just getting report after report after report of Bigfoot being accompanied by these UFO sightings. Prior to those accounts, he really wouldn't have put those two things together. But since encountering that year and a half of seeing these reports coming in together, he had to stop and think that they were somehow connected. There are a couple different theories about UFOs in general, one of them being the extraterrestrial hypothesis, that basically UFOs are coming from another place. They're coming from space. And then there's the interdimensional hypothesis that UFOs and cryptids and ghosts are all just in the same space as us, but in a different dimension. I'm just curious with you guys, who has a strong opinion of that? So if you think that this is extraterrestrial hypothesis is the way that they're coming from another planet, would you raise your hand? Okay. And if you think that it could be interdimensional, would you raise your hand? Okay. So we're really like half and half. We're kind of divided. I'm going to give you my humble opinion. I never want to pretend like I'm an expert. I'm not. I'm a writer. I'm a researcher. But in everything that I've seen regarding ghosts and monsters and aliens, I kind of lean toward the interdimensional hypothesis. It just kind of makes the most sense to me, given the things that I've seen, the locations that I've been to that seem to be really hot spots, which kind of lend credibility to the idea of portals to other dimensions. I would say the Palmer House might be one of those type of places because it's so busy and so hopping with ghosts. My only personal experience with Bigfoot comes from an encounter my older brother had. So I was a baby napping, so it's really not my personal experience. It's kind of my experience by proxy. And it's one of our family legends that we like to refer to as that day my brother took a stroll with Bigfoot. He gave me permission to tell you guys this story, but he never talks about this. My family lived on a farm in Correctionville, Iowa. So now you guys know that Correctionville, or anywhere in Iowa, pretty flat. We don't have a lot of hills in Iowa. We lived on a farm. It was 1978, and my brother was 4 years old, playing in the sandbox outside of our trailer. My mom was inside with me. She had just put me down for a nap, but she was checking on him, every few minutes to make sure that he was still there. But we were out in the farm. What could happen to him? We weren't near town or anything like that. There was no one around us. And my brother was sitting there just minding his own business, playing in the dirt, as we used to love to do. And he looked up and saw a man-shaped being walking across the field and pastures toward our farm. And he just kind of watched this, what he thought was a guy at first, walking toward him for quite some time. As it came closer into view, he saw that it had very long, shaggy, reddish hair covering him. Neither the hairy man or my brother ever spoke to each other. My brother said it was more of an unspoken communication, where it was like, hey, I'm walking. You can come with me if you want. And my brother thought, yeah, I could use a walk. So he went for a walk. He just remembers walking along the trees, but he does remember just never feeling scared at all. I would think as a 4-year-old, if you saw a hairy creature coming at you, you might run inside screaming, but he just felt like this was a friend. Like he was just going for a stroll with a buddy who happened to be covered in hair. After a while, my brother said he just got bored of walking, so he turned around and went back to our trailer. And he went inside and told my mom, I just went for a walk with the hairy man. And of course, my mom panicked and ran outside to see who this hairy man might be, and there was nobody and nothing there. We didn't live in an area with forest. There wasn't a lot of trees around. The farm had a grove, which most farms in Iowa do, which is a bunch of trees that we plant to keep the wind from coming across our farms. There was really no place for any sort of undocumented zoological creature to hide. So that experience alone kind of leads me to believe it kind of almost has to be something interdimensional. He just kind of popped in to our space for a period of time, and then he just kind of popped out. And I'm not going to pretend to understand how that works. I'm still researching and trying to figure it out, but it seems like the same sort of thing with the ghosts that we encounter. It's kind of like we're in the same space, and then suddenly they're in our dimension, and there they are, and then they're gone again. I can't talk about Bigfoot without talking about hoaxes, because I don't know why people do this. They must really want attention, they're bored, whatever, but there are a lot of Bigfoot hoaxes. So I'm just going to touch on the latest one, Georgia hoax of 2008, which was really kind of a big deal at the time because people really believed these guys. Matt Witten, who was a sheriff deputy, so you're going to believe that guy, right? He's supposed to serve and protect us. Rick Dyer and Carmine Biscardi, who was a former Vegas promoter and was actually known to be a scammer, claimed that they had Bigfoot in a freezer. It really began with Matt and Rick making this claim, and then Biscardi hopped in and said, I can help you guys get the word out about this, is basically how it went down. This was followed by newspapers all around the world. I mean, here it was, we finally had Bigfoot, and this picture actually makes me sad, because if that really was Bigfoot, that's really a heartbreaking image of him. But it wasn't. It was a monkey suit, and they had stuck it in a freezer and pretended it was Bigfoot. But these guys were on CNN, they were being interviewed, and they were just really claiming that they had finally found Bigfoot, and they had him in a freezer. So frustrating. But we have to acknowledge it. It's really important to acknowledge the fact that there are people who are going to play on our desire to have proof of these things that we're so interested in. And we have to know that that happens, but we can't let it kind of ruin our passion for what we're trying to understand. It can't ruin our belief, I guess. We have to continue to believe, but we do have to have cautious enthusiasm. We can't jump on everything and say, well, I like to say, it's a ghost every time we go somewhere, and they're like, it's just the wind. I'm like, oh, it's so much more fun if it's a ghost. But we have to be people who observe these things and have a healthy dose of skepticism. We don't want to accuse people who are sharing their claims, like the Jacobson boy who had the video and everyone said, oh, he just made it up. That's not really a frog. But that's his experience, and he's sharing it with us, and we can't accuse people of that unless we have real evidence that they're really scamming us. And we have to be open-minded to just accepting people's stories and accepting these, understanding that sometimes they might not be real, but we have to be open to talking about them. And we also have to keep moving forward in our search for truth without being totally jaded by the people who put these scams out there and try to trick us. Now, why is it important that we come to MUFON meetings? Why is it important we go to these conventions and talk about these things? Why should we talk about this stuff at all? Why does it matter? This is an image of Betty and Barney Hill, and I know you guys have all heard of them. They were the first widely publicized case of alien abduction in America. The incident reportedly occurred between September 19th and September 20th in 1961. Betty and Barney were left with incomplete and fuzzy memories of an encounter with a UFO that left them frightened and confused, and it also left them accused of lying and making it up. You know, some people believed them, and they did some hypnosis to try to bring those memories back, and then some people think they were scamming the whole time. And I don't know if they were or if they weren't. I don't have a real strong opinion about their case either way. But I think it's important for us to talk about these encounters because people are having them, and we need to make it so that they can come out and talk about it. I'm sure if this really did happen to these people, it was a little bit scary to tell people, hey, we just got abducted by aliens. But we need to give a space where people can feel comfortable doing that. So I think, you know, coming to meetings like this and attending conventions that we go to are so important. And we just owe it to each other to be open-minded. Even if we hear something that sounds too outrageous and too crazy, we need to be willing to listen and be supportive. Because if this really does happen to people, it's very, very frightening. And so it's kind of our job in this journey together of life to help each other through these moments and just be open to supporting each other. Like I said, I'm never going to claim to be an expert, but I'm always, always, always going to offer support and love to anyone who has a monster story, an alien story, or a ghost encounter, because that's kind of what I think we're supposed to be doing for each other. I also think it's important to talk about these things because we see disclaimers like this on shows that talk about Bigfoot, monsters, aliens, all that kind of stuff. Basically, the story you have just heard is true, only the names have been changed to protect the innocent. And as I was researching, we found that this was a common thread, that people would make these reports, they would be put into papers, and then they would try to recant their story later. In one incident in Wisconsin, one of the people who reported a sighting of a hairy bipedal monster was harassed by people in his community so terribly that he then said, that isn't what I saw, that isn't what I saw. But they put signs in his yard, they were calling him a liar, they were truly, truly harassing this individual. I think it's so important to talk about this stuff because we need to get to a place where that type of behavior is scarier than encountering Bigfoot. I mean, I'm not afraid of ghosts or monsters or aliens or any of that, but I am afraid of mean people. So we need to get to a place where that to us is far more startling, that people would harass someone for coming forward with a story than the actual encounters that they're telling us about. So I think it's so important what you guys are doing and getting together and bringing people in to talk about it and just making a really safe place to have these conversations and discussions. And finally, as a creative person, I want to talk about why it's important to put this information out there into people's hands in a variety of ways. Chad Lewis, I don't know if you guys have ever had him come talk. He's one of my very favorite writers about this kind of stuff. He is such a great researcher, and he does an incredible job of presenting these stories. People like that who are giving us these nonfiction works are super important to people like me, who then tend to write fictional works based on these nonfiction encounters. But not everybody wants to pick up a nonfiction book about something. Some people would prefer to read a fiction book, so it's important for us to include these type of stories in that manner as well. I also think it's important to do the documentaries. I think it's important to do the movies, like the ones that I put up on the screen. I can really remember watching some of those movies, Poltergeist and, well, Ghostbusters, which was funny, but also like, hey, there's ghosts, you know? That was comforting to me. And so people are going to find themselves in fiction, and they're also going to find a lot of truth in the nonfiction. So I think they're both equally important. So that is what I know. If you didn't like it, blame Mike. It's all his fault. I put up here my links that you can connect with me on Facebook. I always accept friend requests after I do a speaking engagement with people that I don't know. I usually don't accept friend requests if we don't have a common friend, but always after I've spoken, I'll accept anyone's request because I'll assume that it's from you guys. I'm on Twitter. I don't like Twitter. I don't do much of it, so that's the worst place to connect with me. And I'm also on Instagram. So at this time, I'd love to open it up to any questions, and hopefully I'll have an answer. Or if you want to share a story or have an experience you want to share, that would be really cool too.
Yep, and we've got 2 microphones here. We want to make sure we get the questions onto the recording, so throw your hand up, and either me or Mike will track you down and make sure we get your questions. But any questions for Jessica? Question over there, Mike?
Yeah, oh yeah, it's on. Hi, Jessica. Have you heard about the Dog Man?
I
in
have.
Wisconsin?
Yes, I have heard of the Dog Man. And is that one similar to the Beast of Bray Road? I think it's basically the same thing. That one is actually included in our book. And that was the one I was talking about, the report where we actually had to change the name of the person in the story because they had been so harassed by their encounter that our publisher wouldn't let us include it. So we had the name from the paper and everything, and we wrote the story up with all of that information, and then they said, oh, we see that this person got really harassed by this, and so we had to change it. But yes, the Beast of Bray Road is something that's commonly seen in Wisconsin, and it's kind of like a wolfman type of thing. It's a bipedal dog. Again, all these bipedal things that are running around, and it looks a lot like, something like a wolf, but then it just doesn't quite have that same sort of appearance. But there have been a lot of sightings of that there. The one in the book, I think, is of someone who was working for a company that removed the carcasses of animals off the road. And so he saw an animal on the side of the road, and he stopped to retrieve it as he was supposed to. And it was actually not dead. It came alive in the back of his truck, and he had a very terrifying experience. So, yes.
What do you think of that show of these southern guys with the shotguns and the deer rifles that are running around down south and trying to make cages to hold these different types of monsters? Isn't that kind of a mockery?
I don't like that.
Yeah, I don't
I
either.
mean, honestly, to me, that makes me sad. I don't like when I read the stories either, and so many of the reports are, they got out their gun and they tried to shoot it, and I'm like, why? I should sit down and offer it a cookie or something. I don't understand. That actually makes me really sad that people are doing that, and it's really too bad that there's a show like that. Like, why did they pick that up and put that on TV? And a lot of these, I think they just really want the ratings. The more sensational, the better. Yeah, it's kind of sad.
That your interdimensional approach.
Yeah.
It's the first I've heard that. What does that look like to you?
Well, raise your hand if you've seen the show Stranger Things. Oh, you all need to see that show. It's so good. In Stranger Things, there's something called the Upside Down. And so there's this world where we are, this room in our world looks like this. In the upside down, it's basically another dimension. It's the same space, but it's on a different plane. It's on a different level. So we're all in the same world, but there's different levels of dimensions within our world.
So these beings have the ability to cross over whenever they choose? Is that the philosophy?
I do think that. That's kind of what I've seen. And sometimes, I mean, I take this away from my paranormal investigations when we're doing ghost hunts. And sometimes we'll encounter things that they're not really ghosts. They were never living spirits, and they're not demons. They're just kind of there. When I try to explain it to my children, because they love to hear about my ghost hunting stuff, I liken it to like a dog. Like, they're kind of like animals. They have the most basic of thoughts, and we often capture them on our Kinect cameras. If you're familiar with playing hands-free video games like the kids like to play, there's a camera that maps your body in so you don't have to use a remote. We use those for ghost hunting, and we'll a lot of times capture these entities with that, and they're always humping things. Like, that's why I'm like, they're kind of like a dog. They just have this primal instinct to, like be on people all the time, but there's no intelligence to them. They can't really communicate really in any way. And to me, those kind of seem like something that just kind of slipped into our dimension. It doesn't really belong here. It wasn't grandma or grandpa that passed on. It's just kind of a thing, and they just kind of slip in. I don't really quite understand it, but that's the best. Did I describe that very well? Okay.
Yeah, and I haven't seen the show, but so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, is they're in the same space, but they're actually vibrating at a higher frequency. So when you match the frequency, you can pop in or out. So does that sound correct?
Yes, you explained that so much better than me.
Oh, well, thank you. So, but I think there's a question over here, Mike. Did you have one? Yes, yep.
I'm wondering if there has been communication, meaning conversation with any of these beings. Right now it sounds like they're all nonverbal, and there's no real exchange.
And it kind of seems like there's no attempt at an exchange. It kind of seems like we're like, oh snap, there's a monster on my porch. I'm going to go get my gun, And I wonder if we tried to communicate with them, would we be able to? I mean, I think to that experience my brother had with the Harry thing, he said, it felt like we did communicate, but we just didn't speak. So it was a telepathic communication. And I don't know, I think these beings have that ability to communicate with us without words. If we would just put the gun down for a minute and just have a moment of not being afraid. And again, that's why I think it's so important to talk about this stuff, so that we don't feel like we have to put them in a cage, and we don't feel like we have to blow them away with our shotgun, that we can have these encounters and kind of be at peace with it. Because I do think, as weird as it sounds, I think we're always surrounded by different energies that we just don't always notice. And then there's those moments where our frequencies match up and we do notice them. And I don't think that needs to be scary. I think it's just, I tell my kids, like with ghosts, it's kind of like going outside and there's going to be bugs, that's just life. And I think these beings and these energies and spirits are just always there.
So in addition to this story of your 4-year-old brother, do you know of anyone else who's had these experiences where there's actually been an exchange of meaning?
Personally, like within my friends and family.
Or the searches you've been doing.
Yes. Definitely, because with the book that we wrote, we were actually able to interview some people. And so I was actually able to talk to some of these people that had these encounters. So yeah, some of these were, phone calls and sitting down and having conversations with people who had these encounters. And I believe them. I mean, I completely believe them. I don't think that most of us with rational minds make this stuff up, because it's just kind of weird.
No, but do these people who tell you, have they had communication with the experiences that they've had? That's where I'm wondering if we're talking.
Yeah, and nobody I've talked to has had a verbal exchange. Yeah, the most I've gotten, and I have heard similar to my brother, is that nonverbal kind of telepathic exchange of thoughts is the most common thing I've heard.
But you have heard that?
Yes, multiple times.
Oh.
Yeah.
Are you recommending Ouija boards to communicate with these?
No. No, I love how everybody grumbled about that. Thank you. You already know. We don't need those tools to interact with these things. And I think when you get into using stuff like that, you are opening a door, but you don't know what you're inviting in. And so to me, it's like, if something's already in the space with you, you should totally communicate with it. But we don't want to open a door that we don't need to open. Yeah, I think that's dangerous. I highly recommend staying away from theirs. I've never heard anyone with an Ouija board story that ended well. They're always scary. And so that to me right there says, you're not bringing in the kind of stuff you want to have an exchange with. Because my experiences with paranormal are not scary. I think they're really comforting and really cool. If I go into a space and I ask something to turn a flashlight on and they do, I think, thank you. That was really nice of you. That's exactly what I asked you to do. And I feel like that's, a polite communication. Whereas you get the Ouija boards and you tend to have, then we got scratched and we were bleeding and they told us we were all going to die. And no, I think that's bad. And I think a lot of times you're getting stuff that isn't truly what it's saying it is. I think when you do that Ouija board thing, sometimes you get spirits that pretend to be something familiar to you, and they're very manipulative. I would say I've never seen a demon, but if I was going to see a demon, it would probably come from an Ouija board. So.
Any other questions? Mike, question?
I read a book by Rita Louise a few years ago about thousands of years ago, different civilizations around the world had the same gods they worshipped. And I never saw this recently, but a lot of them, like 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, or maybe even more, they had, like the Greek gods, they had like different countries around the world, way before the internet, communication, they had the same stories. And I've heard about some of those amphibians. Have you heard about that in that context? Like probably thousands of years ago, they had frog-like and creatures were amphibious that they worship as gods.
Yes, I have read a little bit about that. I mean, I can't give a super intelligent response to it other than I have heard of those stories before. And it does seem that a lot of these entities and beings that we encounter now have been encountered for generations and generations and thousands of years and go all the way back to times that they weren't recorded like they are now. But we'll find, the writing on the cave walls that depict some of these same sorts of creatures. So this has been going on a really long time.
In that first story you told about the creatures on the roof that were tearing it apart,
yes,
trying to get to the people below. Was there actual damage to the roof?
I didn't see that in the reports that I saw. I just saw that the police report indicated that there was evidence of the scratching and the gunshots. That particular one with the aliens, is that what you're referring to? Yeah, that there was evidence of a struggle supporting that what they were saying was true, but there was just no evidence of the aliens being there. There wasn't like they had left behind a claw that got stuck in the roof or anything like that.
The roof wasn't torn off then?
No, it wasn't torn off. No. Okay. And I don't know if most of the damage seems to have been from the people defending themselves.
Okay, we're just about at 4:30, just about break time. I'm getting a high five for what's the high five for? You have a question? Okay, so we'll do the question back here, then we'll wrap it up and take a break, but we don't want to miss the crew back here.
I had one question on the story of the individual who the monster reached out of the tree and grabbed him by his head and lifted him up.
Yeah.
Did he have any evidence on his head of something grabbed him?
Yeah, again, that's the same story that you were asking about, and that was the alien encounter. They never said anything in the reports that I read from the newspaper reports that he had like torn out hair or anything, but there were multiple people in that home that saw it. And that one's so fascinating to me because it's like you've got what they describe as a very religious and pious grandmother who isn't about to make up a story like this, and then you've got little children, and you've got this such range of people. Then you've got Billy Ray, who sounds like he's probably prone to making up stuff because they're like, yeah, right, Billy Ray, we've heard this one before, So I don't know that there was that sort of evidence, but I think with all the eyewitnesses that they had, that it became a very credible case, and which is probably why the Air Force came out and investigated that one as well.
Cool. Cool. Well, thank you very much. Let's give Jessica a big round of applause. We will be taking a 15-minute break. I believe Jessica will be back there signing and selling books. And if you got more questions for her, I'm sure she'll be happy to answer them. We'll be back in 15. Enjoy the break.